This week started with yet another high-profile mass shooting. In Highland Park, Illinois, a man shot 7 people to death at a July 4th parade. And according to the Gun Violence Archive, over the holiday weekend, there were at least 11 mass shootings. That comes as the challenges facing the nation continue to mount. There's a debate over gun laws, abortion politics, and historic inflation. And this week, President Biden faced a rash of bad headlines, with Democrats questioning whether he is meeting the moment. As an example, following the parade shooting, critics pointed to the president's response as not forceful enough, in contrast to Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker's open frustration.
We got a lot more work to do. We got to get this under control.
If you're angry today, I'm here to tell you, be angry. I'm furious that yet more innocent lives were taken by gun violence.
Meanwhile, Republicans continue to focus on mental health issues rather than access to guns. Joining me tonight to discuss this.
I think yesterday's shooting is another example of what the problem is. The problem is mental health, and these young men who seem to be inspired to commit these atrocities.
Joining me tonight to discuss this and more, Michael Shear, White House correspondent for The New York Times, Jeff Zeleny, Chief National Affairs Correspondent for CNN, and joining me here in studio, Laura Barron-Lopez, White House correspondent for the PBS NewsHour, and Josh Dawsey, Political Enterprise and Investigations reporter for The Washington Post. So, Laura, thank you for being here. Congratulations on the new gig.
Thank you.
This was, of course, a surreal start to the week. I couldn't even imagine that people went to a July 4th parade and ended up running for their lives. Of course, though, the politics on this continue to be challenging. What are you hearing from the White House and lawmakers about whether or not this shooting and all of the other shootings that have happened recently might lead to a renewed effort for even more gun legislation?
It's really difficult to see anything that the president is specifically calling for in addition to what was passed, which was more expanded background checks, red flag laws. But what the president has called for are an assault weapons ban, as well as a ban on high capacity magazines. Those things don't really have any Republican support in Congress. So that's why a lot of advocates and activists and Democrats in his own party are pushing him to do more executive actions. Now, right now, the White House is very focused on just getting their nominee to the Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms Agency confirmed. That's their top priority right now. That's where they're putting all their focus. So it's really, I don't see the White House doing any more executive actions anytime soon.
And that's, of course, a sort of stark reality given what's going on. Michael, I want to come to you because you did a deep dive, a really deep dive, into Democrats wanting to see more fight out of President Biden. I wonder, could you talk a bit about what are the main concerns when you talk to Democrats and allies of the president about what they want to see from President Biden, and how is the White House navigating all of this?
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Yamiche. I think when you talk to Democrats, their complaints sort of divide into two broad categories. One is actual policy, more policy engagement. They want the president to do more to confront inflation, guns, the overturning of Roe v. Wade, and they have a lot of suggestions, none of which. And this is the source of the frustration, the administration is really taking them up on. So, for example, on Roe v. Wade, there are suggestions for them to allow abortions to be done on federal land. The administration says that's not practical. There are some problems with that. The other broad category, though, is the performative piece, right? Part of the presidency is just seeming engaged and being in the moment that the rest of the country is in. And I think this week was a sort of example of how the president, to a lot of Democrats, a lot of his allies, seemed really out of touch. You have all of these big issues hitting the country all at once. And the president was in Cleveland talking about pension plans, and he spent much of the time this week, conferring the Medal of Honor and the Medal of Freedom on a whole bunch of very well-deserving people. But to a lot of Democrats, I think that felt like his heart just isn't in confronting some of these big issues.
I mean, there are so many big issues, and I want to stick with you, Michael, because you wrote in this piece, and I want to read it. Other Democratic politicians are jumping into what they see as a void of leadership. That line really caught my eye. So I wonder who's really jumping in to sort of fill that void that they see, and why are they standing out in a way that President Biden isn't?
Well, so the two examples I think I give in the piece were J.B. Pritzker, who you mentioned, the governor of Illinois, who I think just caught a lot of attention among the kind of the sort of run-of-the-mill Democrats and some of the activists for just his passion and his kind of rising to the moment in terms of his anger after the shooting in Highland Park. The other is Gavin Newsom in California, the governor, who I think raised some eyebrows by not necessarily campaigning and running ads in California, but rather in Florida, directly challenging Ron DeSantis, the Republican governor there. I think there's a lot of Democrats who say, gee, why isn't our president doing that? Why isn't our president taking the fight to the governors of Florida, of Texas, of some of these Republican states? Why isn't President Biden, more aggressive in that way? And the fact that he's not is an opening for other folks.
And Jeff, another headline that caught my eye, or another story that caught my eye, is out of Politico. They say Biden isn't running out of ideas, Dems fear. He's running out of time. What's your sense in talking to all the different sources that you're talking to about the pressure President Biden is facing when the midterms are just 4 months away? And how does that sort of connect with what other presidents before him have had to deal with?
Well, look, the summer before a midterm election is always an uncomfortable position in the White House. President Biden certainly joins the ranks of many presidents who are likely to lose seats in their own party in midterm elections. President Biden has been there to see this firsthand when he was vice president. The summer before President Obama's midterm election drubbing in 2010, it was a difficult time. But the difference, I think, here for President Biden is one of just himself. He is not traveling nearly as much as other presidents. He's not front and center as much as some other presidents. Part of it is his age. Part of it is just the sheer fact of who he is as a politician. He was not elected to go after the governor of Florida. He was not elected to necessarily be the loudest voice in the room. So now, of course, some Democrats, the frustration is boiling over. But as he said the other week, I'm the president who you have. I mean, he is the president in the moment here. So there's nothing that he can perhaps do to satisfy all of the anxieties and the frustrations. But there is more that he likely could do. He's frustrated, I'm told. He has said many, many times, he told me at the beginning of the year in a press conference that he planned to leave Washington more. He planned to be out in the country more. Well, that just hasn't happened all that much. He did travel to Cleveland this week, but it was his first domestic trip in quite some time. Presidents are busy. His schedule is busy with a lot of foreign trips, etc. So the reality of what he can do, he's never likely to meet the moment of some other progressives. But I'm not sure that we want our president necessarily to be going after individual governors. And of course, Governor Pritzker was fired up because this happened in his own state. So we've seen passion from President Biden. But I think what some other leaders, Democrats that I speak to, are really looking for is more of a direction, more of more than just this optimistic speech he sometimes gives, just really taking things by the reins here. And that is something he really hasn't done. So, the challenge here is getting through the summer and then into the midterm elections. He's in a tough spot.
Definitely a tough spot.
Presidents have been in a tough spot before him. We'll see if he digs himself out of it.
It's definitely a tough spot. And Josh, what Jeff is talking about is the frustration boiling over. And I read something that I think if you had asked the Biden campaign whether this would be true in the future, they would of course said no. But in several polls, Joe Biden's approval rating is lower than the former president, Donald Trump. It's a stark thing given the fact that we covered Trump together. I wonder what you see as the significance of that, given that President Biden is trying to sort of put up a fight. I was in Cleveland with him, hearing him talk to union workers, but also President Trump still has this grip on the Republican Party.
He does, and by all accounts, former President Trump would be the nominee if there was an election for a 2024 nomination tomorrow, and he's, by a lot of accounts, thinking about announcing soon for to be the nominee or try to be the nominee for the Republican Party. I think for former President Biden, you have a lot of confluence of factors that are really quite challenging. I mean, as long as inflation is quite high, as long as gas prices are $5 a gallon, as long as there's kind of a concern, I think even about crime in some places, as long as there's a nation that, and it's hard to even kind of put a finger on it. I mean, I've talked to Democratic strategists and others about it, but people that just kind of feel unsettled, whether it's COVID, whether it's the economy, whether it's just a sense that things are not heading in the right direction. I mean, there's always kind of the barometer in politics is, do people think things are heading in the right direction or the wrong direction? And you can somewhat link that to whether someone's reelected or not. And here, there's a lot of the country that thinks things are headed in the wrong direction. And I think if you had his numbers today, you have a Republican Party that's champing at the bit to try and defeat him and thinks they have a quite good chance to do it.
And in talking about the things being unsettled, President Biden today signed an executive order aimed at protecting the access to abortion and medication and emergency contraception. But the reality is there is no action the president can take to restore the nationwide right to an abortion in the wake of the Supreme Court's ruling. Dolores, so I want to, of course, come to you because you've been doing a lot of great reporting on this. How much does this executive order do? What is the impact that the White House thinks it might have?
So this executive action is essentially steps that President Biden directed all of his agencies to do right after the decision came down. This is just a formalization of that. And so ultimately, I was talking to a lawyer about it today who said that it really is just an enforcement of laws to try to direct agencies to protect people who may try to travel, doctors and patients who may try to travel to get an abortion, to enforce, privacy for health data. But it's a lot of just using the current laws that are on the books. And what Democrats want to see the president do is go bigger and be more creative. And so a lot of the executive actions that they want are clearly not a part of what happened today. They're looking for him to use Medicaid to fund travel for abortions, not the actual procedure, because under law, the government can't fund the procedure. And also to expand through the FDA more access to medication abortion, taking away final restrictions that are on some pharmacies. The president may be really cautious about all that simply because of the legal challenges that are likely to come.
And Michael, what's your sense of how Democrats are sort of seeing when President Biden talks about the bright spots here? Because as Laura's talking about sort of what he's trying to do and the limitations, there was, of course, President Biden, as we mentioned, going to Cleveland, wanting to talk about the economy, wanting to talk about some of the good things that are happening. There was a jobs report today that they wanted to take a sort of victory lap on, but they also, of course, had to acknowledge that Americans, as Josh said, just are feeling unsettled and not really that great about where things are.
Yeah, exactly right, Yamiche. I mean, they sort of are stuck. Today was a good example, as you said, that jobs report was strong enough that under normal circumstances, the White House would yell it from the rooftops. But the problem is they're very afraid that if the president is overly optimistic, if the White House is seen as somehow ignoring people's pain, and that he will come across as detached from the way real people are experiencing the economy. And ultimately, the way people vote is not based on some statistic or some percentage that the president can point to on a chart, but it's how they feel about how their lives are going. It's how they feel about their pocketbooks and whether or not they have the kind of resources to do the things for themselves and their family that they want to do. And as I think Josh said, the polls suggest that a lot of people are not feeling great about those kinds of things. And the president risks a lot if he doesn't seem to acknowledge that. But the flip side is that then by acknowledging all of the pain, you sometimes can sound like a sort of a Debbie Downer and not be touting your own success either. So it's a real problem for the administration, especially in this election year.